For 3 decades, Sarah and John Bennett were the picture-perfect couple. They lived in a 2-story colonial-style home nestled in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Westchester, New York. Their lawn was always trimmed. The American flag waved gently from the porch, and every holiday was marked with sparkling lights and themed decorations. From the outside looking in, theirs was a life most people envied. Sarah met John in the fall of 1988 during their freshman year at the University of Vermont. He was charming, confident, and ambitious. She was quiet, bookish, and loved how he made her laugh. He studied business. She majored in English literature. Their courtship was fast. Within a year, they were inseparable. By graduation, they were engaged. They married in the spring of 1992 at a small church surrounded by lilacs, with their closest family and friends watching. John had just secured a job at a marketing firm in Manhattan, while Sarah took up a position as a high school English teacher. Their life began like any other American dream, modest but full of promise. Over the years, they built a home and raised 2 children, Ethan and Grace. John worked hard and climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a senior executive. His job required travel, sometimes to Chicago, sometimes overseas, but he always returned home with gifts and stories, and Sarah never questioned it. She stayed home after their second child was born, trading lesson plans for PTA meetings and bake sales. She kept the house running, made every birthday special, and managed the ups and downs of family life. Friends often commented on how solid they seemed. "You two are still like newlyweds," Sarah's best friend Rachel once said, and Sarah believed it. There were no obvious signs of unhappiness. No yelling, no affairs as far as she knew, and no late-night absences. John wasn't overly affectionate, but he was reliable. She assumed that was what a long marriage became, a partnership rather than a passion. Their routines were sacred. Sunday morning breakfasts, yearly family vacations to Cape Cod, movie nights on Fridays. They even hosted an annual neighborhood barbecue that had become a community tradition. Sarah believed that despite the lack of fireworks, they had built something lasting, something secure. She often told her daughter, "Real love isn't about butterflies. It's about showing up every day." But as their 30th anniversary approached, Sarah started to feel a hollow ache she couldn't quite name. There were subtle shifts. John's increased travel, his distracted demeanor, the way he clutched his phone tighter than before. He smiled less. He no longer held her hand during walks. When she tried to bring up her feelings, he brushed them off with a kiss on the forehead and a vague, "You worry too much." Still, she dismissed her doubts. After all, 30 years of marriage wasn't a fairy tale. People changed. Life got busy. Passion cooled. But loyalty, that was the foundation they had built their lives upon. Or so she thought. Because deep beneath the surface of their perfect marriage, John Bennett was hiding a secret so devastating, so deeply buried, that when it finally came to light, it would shatter everything Sarah believed about love, loyalty, and the man she had shared her entire adult life with. Looking back, Sarah could now see the subtle signs that their marriage hadn't been as perfect as it seemed. At the time, though, they felt more like minor inconveniences than red flags. Like a slow leak under the sink you keep meaning to fix but never do. John's travel schedule had grown more demanding over the years. When the kids were younger, he would call every night from hotel rooms in places like Chicago, Miami, or Dallas, checking in before bedtime to hear how their day went. But as the children got older, those nightly calls became less frequent. Sarah never pressed him. She assumed it was part of climbing the corporate ladder, part of being a provider. That was his role, wasn't it? Still, there were moments that gnawed at her. Like how John never let her touch his phone. He used to leave it lying around the house, but in recent years it was always either in his hand or locked away in his briefcase. One time she asked to use it because hers had died, and he looked visibly panicked, offering to plug hers into the charger instead. It was small, but it stuck with her. Then there were the absences during holidays. Twice he had missed Thanksgiving, citing last-minute business trips. Once, he was gone for their anniversary, sending roses and a cold apology via text message. Sarah spent the night alone, sipping wine and re-watching their wedding video, wondering when exactly he'd stop trying. Their intimacy had also faded. Not gradually, but abruptly, like a light bulb going out. When Sarah tried to initiate, John would deflect. He was tired. He had an early flight. He wasn't feeling well. She chalked it up to age or stress. Maybe he just wasn't interested in that part of their relationship anymore. It hurt, but she rationalized it. At least he wasn't cheating. He was still kind, still dependable. He mowed the lawn every Sunday. He helped their daughter with her mortgage paperwork. He brought Sarah coffee in bed once a week, like clockwork. But there was an emotional wall between them. One she couldn't scale, and he refused to tear down. Sarah confided in her sister once over lunch. "I just feel like he's not really here anymore," she had said, stirring her soup. "Do you think he's having an affair?" her sister asked carefully. Sarah had laughed. "John? No. He barely has time for me, let alone someone else." She truly believed it. If anything, she feared the opposite, that he had simply fallen out of love with her. That perhaps their bond had eroded under the weight of time, not betrayal. But there were other oddities too, like the expensive cologne she'd never seen before, or the hotel bills charged to their joint account, always the same luxury suite at the Langham in Chicago, or the way he flinched once when she tried to surprise him at the airport, claiming his flight had been delayed when it hadn't. Each moment on its own was easy to explain away, but looking back, Sarah would remember them all in painful detail. Pieces of a puzzle that made perfect, horrifying sense only in retrospect. Because the truth was that John Bennett hadn't just drifted from his wife. He had been living a double life. And Sarah was about to uncover it in the most brutal, soul-crushing way imaginable. Started with a phone call. On a chilly Thursday afternoon in early March, Sarah was at home folding laundry when John's iPad buzzed on the kitchen counter. He'd left it behind in his usual rush out the door for a conference in Chicago. Normally, she wouldn't have thought twice about it. But something about the way the screen lit up and displayed the name Elliot R. made her pause. The name meant nothing to her. No co-workers, no family member she could recall. And yet, the text preview underneath chilled her. "Missing you already. Last night was everything. Same time next week." Sarah blinked. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the laundry aside. A sick feeling began to creep through her chest. A slow, twisting dread that she tried to silence with logic. It must be a mistake, she told herself. A coworker joking around. Maybe it was an inside joke. Maybe. The iPad buzzed again. "Wish I could wake up next to you every day. Love you, Jay. Love you." The phrase echoed like a gunshot in her ears. Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing. For 30 years, John had been hers. Her husband. Her partner. Her forever. And now, after 3 decades of marriage, she was reading a message from another man. Not just flirtatious but intimate. Deeply personal. Romantic. She unlocked the iPad. He never expected her to look. He'd always assumed she didn't care for technology. But that assumption was his first mistake. Within minutes, her worst suspicions were not only confirmed, they were blown apart. Hundreds of messages between John and Elliot R. scrolled across the screen. There were photos, candid shots of hotel beds, champagne glasses, intimate selfies of the two men smiling together in bathrobes. There were flight confirmations, weekend rendezvous, even a romantic trip to Paris 2 years earlier during what John had claimed was a sales retreat. Sarah's hands shook as she read one particular exchange from only a week ago. "Elliot, do you think she suspects?" "John, not a chance. She still thinks I'm just working late. God, I hate lying to her. But I can't lose you." It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under her. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the kitchen stool, the iPad still in her hands. 30 years. 30 years of birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, children, dinner parties. All while he had been hiding an entire life. Not with a mistress, but with a man. Elliot R. Turned out to be Elliot Ramirez, a 45-year-old interior designer John had apparently met at a corporate gala 5 years ago. The affair had started slowly, then grew into something long-term and deeply committed. Elliot was everything John claimed to be when he was with Sarah. Attentive, passionate, open. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a revelation. The man she thought she knew, the man she shared her life, her children, her home with, had been lying not just about who he was with, but about who he truly was. And suddenly, Sarah was forced to question everything. Every touch, every kiss, every memory. Had he ever loved her? Or had their entire marriage been a lie? The heartbreak was so intense it physically hurt. But what came next wasn't just sadness. It was rage. Years of sacrifice. Years of being a loyal wife, raising their children, holding down their household while he played out a second life. And he had the audacity to keep her in the dark, to use her as a cover, to make her feel unwanted while he gave himself fully to someone else. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She didn't cry. She sat alone in the living room, staring at the iPad, reading every message, every date, every confession. And something inside her hardened. She wasn't going to be humiliated. Not after 30 years. When John returned home that Sunday evening, suitcase in hand and a rehearsed smile on his face, he didn't know she had read everything. He didn't know she had already loaded the revolver she kept in the nightstand. The one he had bought her for protection 10 years ago and taught her how to use. He kissed her on the cheek like always. He asked what she made for dinner. And then Sarah calmly walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer and picked up the weapon. John Bennett never saw it coming. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet. Sarah could hear John in the kitchen, humming to himself as he unpacked the groceries he'd picked up on the way home. The sound was familiar, even comforting, but it no longer stirred warmth in her. Instead, it burned like acid against the raw betrayal lodged in her chest. She stood in the bedroom doorway holding the revolver in both hands. Felt heavier than she remembered. Her palms were slick with sweat, her pulse pounding like war drums in her ears. Her mind wasn't calm. It was racing, flashing back through every smile he'd ever faked, every lie he'd told, every night she'd waited up worrying while he was wrapped in someone else's arms. She stepped into the hallway. "John," she called softly. He appeared around the corner, holding a bottle of wine and a loaf of bread. "Hey babe," he said with a grin. "You're not gonna believe the Merlot I found." Then he saw the gun. He froze. What are you doing?" His voice cracked, the bottle slipping from his hand and shattering on the hardwood floor. "I read your messages," Sarah said. Her voice was hollow, like she wasn't fully there. "I saw everything." John's face turned pale. "Sarah, please, I can explain." She raised the revolver with both hands. 30 years, she whispered, her finger hovering over the trigger. 30 years I gave you. My youth, my body, my soul. I trusted you, and you threw it all away. For him. "Please," John stammered, stepping back. "Don't do this. It wasn't what you think. I never meant to hurt you." "Hurt me?" she spat. "You didn't just hurt me, John. You destroyed me." Then the first shot rang out. The bullet hit him in the shoulder. He screamed and fell to the ground, crawling backward as blood seeped into the tile. "Sarah, please," he begged. "I'm sorry. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you." Another shot. This one hit him in the thigh. He writhed on the floor, crying out, trying to reach the phone on the counter. Sarah walked forward, slowly, methodically, like something primal had taken control. "You lied to me," she said coldly. "For years." A third shot into his abdomen. John's screams had turned into sobs. "Please don't." The fourth bullet struck him in the chest. He gurgled, coughing up blood, trying to speak. The fifth, his hand, as he reached out. The sixth, his shoulder again. The seventh and final bullet hit him squarely in the heart. Then there was silence. The kind of silence that settles after a storm. Heavy, haunting, final. Sarah stood there, staring at the body of the man she had loved, the man she had built her entire life around. He lay in a pool of red, eyes wide in shock, lips parted as though trying to form one last apology he'd never get to finish. The revolver clattered to the floor. Her chest rose and fell, slowly, like the spell was wearing off and the full weight of what she'd done was finally settling in. But there were no tears. Not yet. She turned around, walked to the couch, and sat down with eerie calmness. Blood smeared across the tile behind her, the faint metallic scent already filling the air. She stared blankly ahead, her thoughts a whirlwind of rage, sorrow, disbelief, and beneath it all, a hollow, aching numbness. The marriage was over. The lies were dead. And John Bennett, husband, father, secret lover, was gone. The silence in the house didn't last long. Sirens tore through the suburban night like a pack of wolves, closing in on the Bennett residence with blinding red and blue flashes. Neighbors stood outside in robes and slippers, drawn by the echo of gunshots. Some already had their phones out, filming, whispering, speculating. Inside, Sarah sat quietly on the couch. Her hands were still stained with blood, but she didn't move. She hadn't moved since she placed the revolver gently on the coffee table beside her. Like a relic from a nightmare she hadn't quite woken from. The front door burst open. "Police! Drop any weapons and show your hands." She didn't flinch. She simply raised her empty palms into the air and said, "He's in the kitchen." Officers swarmed the house. One of them rushed to check John's pulse, but the blood loss and trauma had already claimed him. Paramedics arrived seconds later. It didn't matter. John Bennett was pronounced dead at the scene. Detectives found the unlocked iPad. They found the messages, the photos, the truth, and they found Sarah, composed, eerily calm, and ready to talk. "I killed him," she said without being asked, "because he lied to me for 30 years. They arrested her on the spot. As they led her out of the house in handcuffs, she caught a glimpse of her neighbor, Mrs. Conway, standing across the street. Her mouth agape, eyes wide with horror. Sarah offered her a hollow smile as if to say, "Now you know too." The media storm hit like wildfire. "Wife kills husband after discovering his secret gay affair," screamed the headlines. Morning talk shows debated the psychology of betrayal. True crime podcasts had a field day. Commentators and armchair analysts argued. Was it a crime of passion or cold-blooded murder? The court documents revealed everything. The affair, the secret trips, the double life John had led for nearly a decade. Sarah's defense attorney argued temporary insanity, a mental snap after years of emotional deception and betrayal. She gave her life to this man, the lawyer told the jury. She bore his children. She stood by him. And when she discovered not just infidelity, but a hidden identity, her world shattered. But the prosecution pushed back. "She planned it," the prosecutor said. "She waited for him to come home. She retrieved the weapon. She shot him 7 times. That's not a snap. That's execution." Witnesses took the stand. Former friends, neighbors, even their grown children, devastated and torn. Their daughter cried as she testified, saying she couldn't reconcile the mother she knew with the killer now on trial. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Sarah Bennett was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. As he handed down the verdict, he looked her in the eyes and said, "You were betrayed, but betrayal is not a license to kill." In prison, Sarah became a ghost of her former self. Quiet, withdrawn. She didn't speak much. She didn't cry. She refused visitors, even her children. For Sarah, time stopped the day she pulled that trigger. In the outside world, people moved on. The Bennett house was sold, repainted, and resold again. Elliot Ramirez moved out of state, leaving behind only scandal and whispers. But in one cell of a women's correctional facility, a woman sat alone with nothing but memories of a life that once felt perfect, and the burning question that would haunt her until the end of her days. Did I ever really know the man I married? The Bennett case didn't just shake a family, it shook an entire community. In the days following the shooting, the town became divided. At church gatherings, barbershops, and PTA meetings, the same question echoed again and again. Was Sarah a victim of unbearable betrayal, or a murderer who couldn't handle the truth? Some people viewed her as a woman pushed beyond the edge. "She lost 30 years of her life to a lie," said Marion Clay, a neighbor who had known Sarah since their children were in preschool. If my husband had been hiding something like that from me for decades, God knows what I'd do. Others weren't as sympathetic. She had a choice. One former friend said during an interview with a local TV station, "Plenty of people get cheated on. That doesn't mean you pick up a gun." The national media feasted on the drama, equal parts scandal, tragedy, and social commentary. Late-night hosts made tasteless jokes about closet cases ending in coffins. Cable news brought in psychologists and relationship experts to analyze John's double life and Sarah's explosive reaction. But beneath the surface-level noise, deeper conversations began to stir. The LGBTQ+ community weighed in, many acknowledging that while John had deceived his wife, his situation reflected the tragic consequences of living in a society that, for decades, punished gay men for being honest about who they were. He was living a lie, one columnist wrote. But that lie was also a product of fear of rejection, shame, losing his children, his community. Still, others in the LGBTQ+ community emphasized that deception, especially at the expense of someone else's entire life, shouldn't be romanticized or excused. There are men who come out late in life, a gay rights advocate said, and they do it with dignity. John Bennett didn't. He cheated, he lied, and he risked everything, including his wife's sanity. Sarah's story became the subject of podcasts, documentaries, even a dramatized streaming series. Her mugshot became infamous, cold, haunting, with a trace of the pain that hadn't yet been processed. Meanwhile, her children bore the cruelest weight of all. They lost both parents in a single night, one to death, the other to prison. They struggled with public attention, judgment, and their own emotional whiplash. Grief, betrayal, and shame wrapped around them like a second skin. In a letter later published by their daughter in a major newspaper, she wrote, "People talk about this story like it's entertainment, but for us it's blood-stained reality. My father lived a lie. My mother committed the unthinkable. And my brother and I are left holding pieces of a life that will never make sense again." Years passed. The frenzy died down. And for Sarah Bennett, sitting alone in her cell, every headline, every memory, every sleepless night reminded her of the same bitter truth. She wasn't just grieving the man she lost. She was grieving the man he never truly was. 10 years later, the world had changed. Technology had evolved, presidents had come and gone, but inside the weathered walls of the State Women's Correctional Facility, time moved differently for Sarah Bennett. She was now 68. Her once auburn hair had grayed into silver, her cheeks hollowed, and her eyes, those same soft, nurturing eyes that once made John fall in love, now looked like a well of sorrow too deep to empty. She didn't talk much. In prison, she was simply Bennett, a quiet inmate who kept her head down, never got into trouble, never caused a stir. She read books. She attended grief counseling. She wrote letters that were never mailed, to her children, to herself, to John. Once a month, her daughter sent her a card. It rarely said more than a few words. "Hope you're okay. We're managing. Take care." But even those few lines meant the world to Sarah. Her son hadn't written in years. She didn't blame them, because some truths, no matter how justified or passionate, leave scars too deep to ever fully heal. Occasionally, she was reminded of the outside world. An inmate would recognize her name and say, "Aren't you that woman who shot her gay husband?" She never replied. What was the point? Her legacy had been reduced to a footnote in other people's drama, dissected by strangers, misquoted by tabloids, and misunderstood by everyone. But there were days when Sarah allowed herself to remember. The way John used to kiss her forehead when she was sick. The trips to Cape Cod. The way he held her hand in church when the sermon got emotional. The way he smiled when he thought no one was looking. And then she'd remember the texts, the lies, the man she never really knew.